Welcome to Speak to the Human, a podcast hosted by me, Sarah Abramson. Speak to the Human is a podcast that explores how we build connections with people in their professional work. It's about the human experience at work and about how to foster that connection and belonging to support people and their organisations to flourish. Through conversations with leaders, creatives and researchers, this podcast covers a wide range of topics, from psychological safety to risk, belonging, creativity, storytelling, leading change, behavioural science and much more. I'm your host, Sarah Abramson, and I'm really looking forward to you joining me and hearing from our brilliant guests. This is the first episode of Speak to the Human, and it's great to be joined by my colleague James. And obviously we talk to each other all the time, so it's a really nice, relaxed way to have a first conversation. And I guess talk through what we mean by Speak to the Human, which is a phrase we use regularly in various different ways at Actian. So really good for us to be able to chat that through. James is a director and partner at Actian, and he's a lead consultant working with a wide variety of clients, from broadcasting to the charitable sector to care homes to pharmaceuticals and all sorts of other organisations, and across a variety of different project types. Really wide-ranging, fascinating stuff, from a programme for inductees in the film and TV industry, which you've been working on for the last, I think, 3 years, getting brilliant people into roles that they couldn't imagine doing and helping them to succeed in those roles, and a really interesting kind of cross-industry collaboration for that project, including companies like Netflix and led by an industry body called Screen Skills, through to projects that include video interviews with leaders and executives, all sorts of fascinating people in that, like former Australian Prime Minister Julia Gillard, I think was one of your recent interviewees, right through to things like a strategic consultancy project helping care homes, a national care home provider, to look at the best practices of outstanding managers and sharing those working habits across other care homes. So some really interesting stuff. I'm looking forward to chatting that through and kind of relating it to this whole concept of Speak to the Human. So welcome, James. Hello.
Good morning. Nice to be here.
How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's a bit odd finding myself in the position of the interviewee because, as you said, I spend a lot of time interviewing people. I spend a lot of time filming. I have done a lot of that kind of thing in my career so far. And it's a bit strange finding yourself on the other side of the other side of the table. I think I'm a very curious person, and I enjoy asking other people things about themselves. You mentioned the fact that people are fascinating, and I completely agree with that. And I think that is a thread that goes through everything we do at Actian. Normally, the people who I'm talking about are other people rather than myself. And so this is a good opportunity for me to talk about what I do and why I do it and how I think about things. And I'll be very, very interested to see what emerges.
Well, and you do so many different and fascinating jobs that, and projects, that it's great to kind of be able to share some of that. So to start with, it'd be good, I think, to tell us a bit about your background and how that connects with the type of work that you do now at Actian.
Yeah, I grew up wanting to be a TV cameraman. That was my kind of childhood dream. And then I nearly went to film school. I didn't. I spent some time working for the BBC and local radio, went from the BBC to university, and then from university, really through luck largely and being in the right place at the right time, I fell into a job as a journalist at ITN, making the news for ITV. And I had wanted to go into a technical role. That was what I expected to do. I found myself sort of on the other side of the camera, or next to the camera at least, doing a lot of interviewing, out filming. I became a producer, so I was out kind of gathering news for reports that were going to go onto the bulletins. And it meant that I could be doing anything. The job that I did for longest was health and science producer. So effectively any science story, medical story, NHS story, those types of things, they were my responsibility, and coming up with ideas for what we were going to do, finding the people to do it with, going out, filming, interviewing, sort of creating a story alongside a presenter who was going to be the one who appeared on TV. That was what I did. Because the team wasn't that large, actually, I probably spent as much time doing other things like politics, like foreign news, all sorts of stories really around the UK and around the world, as well as health and science. And it was fascinating. I mean, I really enjoyed it. And I met a lot of interesting people. I did a lot of interesting things. My final job before I left ITN was to create, I think, the largest bomb ever detonated on UK national television, which was so big we couldn't blow it up in the UK. We had to go out to the California desert where the US Navy built a bomb for us, and we exploded it to show people what you could do with 500 kilos of fertilizer if you were a terrorist. So I did a lot of quite weird things. I finished doing that and sort of didn't really know what to do next. I wanted to do something different. And I came to Actian kind of not really knowing who I was, I think, or what I wanted to do, but being really interested in the world and the things that make people tick. And what has been brilliant about this role is that it has enabled me to be curious in those ways, but to see a tangible impact for clients. So it's what I'm interested in is how we can make a difference for clients and for the people who work in those organizations. I think this is the first time in my life that I've been able to see an actual link between my interest in the world and my interest in why people do what they do and who they are and how they think and how they behave, and stuff changing as a result of that.
That's fantastic. I think it's one of the things that I particularly enjoy about working at Actian is that there are, particularly amongst the consultants, a real eclectic range of backgrounds and experiences, and people bring those different threads and insights and personality traits together, and we kind of sort of join them up to find really interesting and innovative ways to solve problems, which is brilliant. I think it's so interesting hearing your background in TV, and honestly, I'm really jealous. It sounds amazing. But I guess fundamentally, TV and kind of creating the stories that you're creating there, it's about building an emotional connection with people so that they want to. You're thinking about the receiver. You're thinking about how do you make a story that connects with that person on the other end, with their imagination or with something that they're interested in, or a way of motivating them to carry on watching what you're doing, which directly relates to this whole idea of speak to the human, I think. So it'd be good to hear, what does speak to the human mean to you as a phrase and the way that we think about it?
It's one of those things that I think about this in so many different ways. I sort of take it as it's a kind of commandment. So whatever you are trying to achieve. Now, I guess I'm talking kind of in the world of the companies that we work with at Actian. So in working with organisations, in working with clients. But you could interpret this more broadly. But whatever you are trying to achieve in the world, think about people, speak to those people. You have to connect with people and communicate with them in order to achieve any kind of meaningful change. So you can take it that way. You can sort of interpret it as an instruction and a whatever you call it, a kind of mantra that we can have in mind when we're working with a client and thinking about how they can achieve what they want to achieve. But the bit that really matters to me is the human bit, and I almost would put that first, because when you think about an organization, when you think about some entity that is trying to do something, whether it could be a retailer, it could be a care home, it could be a broadcaster, it could be making a film, whatever it is, that organization, that thing has no existence outside the people who make it. So if you imagine let's imagine you run a shop. Like, the shop doesn't have an existence of its own. The thing that makes it exist and that makes it successful and that makes it profitable or to do whatever you want it to do are the people who are involved. If you're in a big company and whatever, let's say you've got a big company, you've got 1,000 people in an office somewhere, and you want to bring out a new compliance policy, the policy isn't actually the thing that matters. What matters is the way that people respond and the things that people do. So everything is about human beings, and more than about human beings, it's about humans doing things. And so whatever we are doing, we are thinking about the humans, and we are encouraging clients to think about the humans, because that's actually the thing that makes the difference and the thing that will change the world in some way. It could be small, could be big, but it's going to do something that is meaningful. The I think the third level that I think about this, whenever I hear it this expression, speak to the human, it makes me think of people and search for the hero inside yourself. And it is about thinking actually individuals matter. So we think about big organizations, but the individual is the level that we need to communicate on. And for each individual themselves, they are the hero of their life. They're the kind of the main character in their own story. And so whatever is going on in the world around them, whatever their employer is deciding to do, whatever their organization is trying to do, actually they are the point. That's inside them, inside their brain, inside their life. That's where everything that influences them comes together and determines what the outcomes will be. So when we look at the big picture of here's what an organization wants to achieve, actually the thing that matters is what an individual chooses to do in a specific moment in their life at work.
Absolutely. I think one of the most interesting things that we tried to get hold of is that gap that can often feel wide between organisational strategy at the top level, the types of things that people talk about in the boardroom, the KPIs, the objectives, and translating that into what does it mean for an action that you need a person to take in the moment. And basically everything comes down to that. So you can have these grand sounding strategies, but ultimately, if you can't influence people to change their behaviour, whatever that is, then it's really difficult to implement anything. So as you say, organisations are these collections of humans, and we need to understand those humans, what drives them, what motivates them, what helps them, what supports them, what helps them to bring their whole self to work, but in a really inclusive way, but in a way that also enables the organisation as a whole to function together, to collaborate and to operate. So we talk about a behavioural approach, and I guess sort of thinking about how do we think about behaviours to bridge that gap between strategy and action? How do we kind of, it feels quite cavernous, doesn't it? It feels like this enormous space sometimes. So what does that look like?
Yeah, it can feel cavernous, and I think it can feel impossible to get started as well. We've worked with several clients now on big diversity and inclusion projects, and it can feel a bit like the brief is kind of how do you change the way people think? Like how do you, if given that there is a problem with the fact that society is fundamentally unequal, people are not always kind, they don't always treat each other fairly or equally or respectfully. So anything to do with diversity and inclusion in an organization that you want to change, really you're saying like how do you change human beings? And that can feel impossible to get started with. But if you look at it and think, well, what is one thing I could change? And even if I couldn't change it in everybody, is there something that I could change for a large enough number of people that it would begin to make a difference to the organization, and perhaps over time we would see change? You can start to kind of chip away at it and find a way in, and then things can sort of grow outwards from that. This behavioral idea of thinking about what people do, so not what people know, not even really what people think perhaps, but looking at, you might almost call it a symptom, like what do people do and what do you want people to do differently? If you want to change something, how are you going to know that this is working? You might decide to run some kind of campaign, you might decide to create some training, you might decide to make some kind of communications or whatever it might be. But there has to be a point. You have to be able to say, okay, this is what we would like to be different in the world. And so I've got an idea that if I do this thing, there will be some kind of an impact. And as a result, the world will look different and I'll be able to see that. And I think being able to articulate what it is that would be different when you get this right is really powerful. Um, Thinking about that point about diversity and inclusion, that can be a really hard one to measure
Yes.
because a lot of it is about thought. But there are ways you can make it tangible, like understanding your organization better. It makes me think of the project that we did a few years ago with Channel 4, where they wanted to effectively to raise the profile of diversity and inclusion, to make it a subject people were talking about and thinking about. But they had some metrics. They wanted to understand the organization better so that they could manage diversity and inclusion more effectively. And so we ran a whole campaign, we designed a whole campaign for them, which was about helping people understand why that mattered. So why does it matter that Channel 4 understands who works here? And the way that Channel 4 understands who works here is through the kind of HR surveys that you fill in when you apply for a job. It's like, do you have a disability? How do you identify in terms of gender and ethnicity and those kind of things? And a lot of people don't fill those in, or they tick the I don't want to declare box, particularly people from minority groups. If you have a disability, then you are less likely to tick the box disclosing that you have a disability, so you don't understand it. So a campaign that was targeted on that action of telling your employer who you are and what it is about you that makes you different perhaps to other people, so that the employer can understand that. That's an action.
Yes.
So this idea of making diversity and inclusion, like changing that, is really hard. But saying, let's come up with an action people can do here, and actually disclosing something personal about myself is an action.
Yes.
Understanding why I would want to do that. Well, that's why you have the campaign. Why does this matter? Why is this going to help? Why is this going to help us make more groundbreaking, cutting edge television programs that will shape the face of British society? All those things mean I'm more likely to do what's needed when I'm asked to tell the employer who I am. So trying to find a way of making something quite intangible, concrete, and about an action is fundamental.
Absolutely. And I think, so we talk quite often about from the mammoth to the mini. And I think what's interesting is that a particular action can feel like it's a bit too small sometimes. So particularly, as I was saying about that gap between the kind of boardroom strategy and the everyday moment can feel big. So this mammoth to the mini can be a little hard to get your head around if that action feels like it's too small. But if you think of collectively adding up everybody in an organisation taking a particular action, then it becomes mammoth. It becomes something that can have that really big impact. And I think the key thing is to find the actions that have disproportionate impact. So how do you everybody's taking thousands of actions and thousands of decisions every day. So what are the things that we can help to identify, and how do we identify those things that have that disproportionate impact? And I guess that then relates to, how do you know it's working? How do you know those are the things that are going to make the biggest difference? How do you go about helping to identify what those things are?
Finding those disproportionate moments where, if you can influence what people do, it's going to have a bigger impact. It's going to amplify what you can achieve across a broad population, across an organization. That is really powerful. We talk about moments that matter, and moments that matter are the ones where the choice somebody is making in that moment is going to have an impact on the outcome. And the outcome could be anything. I mean, this could be about how well they do their job. It could be about how profitable they are in terms of selling things to a customer. It could be about their well-being. It could be about the way they speak to a colleague, the way they respond to a difficult situation. It could literally be anything. But identifying those moments that matter so that you can try and shape them is fundamental to our approach. To give you an example of what we mean by moments that matter, there are loads, but imagine let's say, okay, you talked about the boardroom. The boardroom has set a priority that we are going to become a more effective hybrid organization where people can work remotely, and that's just kind of business as usual, that we're going to work remotely and everybody is going to feel included, and the people will be happy working in those ways, and it will be a nice place to work. So that's the organizational objective. Achieving that is underpinned by all these decisions people make. There are going to be loads of them, but a key one that you might pick out is when you join a meeting remotely, and the first thing that pops up, often depending on which program you're using, the first thing that pops up is a question like, do you want to turn your camera on or not? And often the default is, no, I don't want to turn my camera on. So that's a choice. I mean, I've got a choice there. I can choose to leave my camera off. I can choose to turn my camera on. If the default is to have my camera off, then leaving it like that is a choice. I'm choosing not to act. So that is a moment that matters. And the action that I take, if I choose to turn my camera on, we know, everyone knows, I think, that if you join online meetings and you use a camera, then the meetings will be better.
Yes.
Like we will engage with each other more effectively if we can see each other.
Yeah.
If people choose to turn their cameras off, then they are not present in the same way as somebody who turns their camera on. And so individuals will have, I mean, there will be people who have a reason why they don't want to turn their camera on, and that's okay. And I would not say everybody mandates that you have mandatory camera usage, because that won't be appropriate for everyone. But the choice matters. And
yes.
If we can influence people so that more people, more of the time, are choosing to turn on their camera in an online meeting, we will have a more effective hybrid working, remote working setup.
Yeah.
So that's a moment that matter. And then you can think, well, what is it that we can do that will shape that? How can we influence that moment so that people are more likely to make the choice that we believe is associated with positive impact? And this is where understanding the people, so talking to the organization, talking to the people involved, thinking, why do people behave in different ways? What is it that makes us more likely to act in that moment? Then we can begin to think, how do we influence that? How can we shape it? How can we shape people's behavior and help them make choices that are more associated with positive outcomes?
Absolutely. I love that example. It's a good one to choose, because we're right now looking at each other on Zoom, and I'm sure that we're having a better conversation because I can see your face and I feel like I'm having a meaningful chat with you like we would in the office. But as you say, it gets less comfortable if you start mandating these things. But if you can think about motivating people, that's one of the sort of core elements of taking a behavioural approach and helping people to do the things that would be helpful to them and to the organisation. I suppose that idea of what's in it for me is really central to that. How do you think we can explain in different contexts that type of idea of what's in it for me? Or maybe more broadly, to think about different ways to motivate people to do the thing that we need them to do. What works, and what stood out for you from previous projects of great ways to convey that and to influence the action?
Yes, absolutely. And of course, sometimes the things are mandated. I mean, you may have a mandated policy that says you will always do your job in this way. This is how we, preserve health and safety at work.
Yes.
You can make it as mandatory as you want. You can have as many policies as you want. You can,
if something's on fire, this is what you do
as much as you want.
Yeah.
And you can also guarantee that because people are human, that but potentially large numbers of them will not do those things.
Yes.
Like things can be mandatory. That doesn't mean people will do them. And it's this is where the tension between company objectives, boardroom discussions, policies, whatever else, and humans really becomes felt. People do not do the things you tell them to do because we just don't. I mean, that's who we are.
Yeah.
So thinking about moments that matter helps, because that's how you translate this into stuff that people can do. How do you shape a moment that matters? We take a behavioral approach to this, and the way we look at it is through the three key drivers of what somebody does in a moment. So the moment is going to happen anyway. So we should say this: you don't create the goal of this is not to create a moment in which people can act, because the moment is going to happen. There are probably thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of these moments happening every working day in your organization and in your life. What we're trying to do is pick the ones that matter and then pay attention to them so that we can shape them. And the drivers we think about are capability, motivation, and opportunity. Capability is really about skills, knowledge, information. If I'm going to act, do I know what to do or not? If I know what to do, then I can do it. Motivation is about, I suppose, a feeling of connection with the action. So as a human, as an individual, do I feel that this action matters? Whatever you're asking me to do I care about it? Do I want to do it? Am I motivated to act in the moment? An opportunity is about having the chance to do it. So the things around me, the people, the processes, the environment that I'm in, are they helping me to do this thing that you want me to do, or are they getting in the way and perhaps becoming a barrier? So opportunity is about making it possible in the moment for it to happen, that there's nothing that stops it happening, and perhaps there are things that encourage it to happen. We could look at something like, I mean, it's a very, very tiny example, but this point about turning the camera on in an online meeting. Capability is trivial, isn't it? I mean, it's a switch that you click when you go into a meeting. That's not difficult. Motivation is probably about understanding why this matters, and that sense that this matters to me. This is something that, even if I don't really want to do it, I'm going to do it because I get why it's important to colleagues, to the organisation, to my team, to what's about to happen, and to our culture. Opportunity, some of that I think is probably environmental, in that if I go into a meeting and everybody else has turned their camera on, then I'm more likely to do it too. But there are also kind of positive triggers that we can use, like perhaps making it the default that at the beginning of a meeting, there will be a prompt from the person who's leading the meeting that I'm going to remind everyone to turn their camera on. So all those things come together, and turning the switch on is easy. I know that it matters to turn the switch on because it's something we talk about at work, and we have a culture where that's something that we emphasize as being important. And then in the moment, there's the opportunity because I'm reminded to do it, and I can see other people modeling that behavior.
Brilliant. I wonder if, as well, sort of thinking about people's context and how they relate to each other, I think one of the things that you've done brilliantly in many of the campaigns that you've built is to relate how we engage people with the culture that they're in, the organisational culture, and to help them see how what they're being asked to do really relates to something that they care about in their work, because they want to belong to that culture. We're talking a lot about belonging at the moment, and that's important for this, I think, because belonging encompasses inclusivity for me. So I think you belong as who you already are, and the diversity that brings in terms of the collection of people that organisations are made up of. We want to celebrate that diversity. We want to think about getting the best from different types of people, and that essential need that organisations have to draw on different types of people. It's like I was talking about earlier about the sort of eclectic mix of colleagues we've got at Actian. That's a strength. It's a huge strength. You want an organisation to have that kind of range of different people, different personality types, different ways of thinking. But whatever makes the culture, whatever creates that culture, is kind of fundamental to how you belong and what you want to belong to. And I guess engagement really relates to that. So I'm thinking of some of the projects you've worked on. You've found ways to thread the culture through the piece that you're creating. So, say a video. Channel 4 is a nice example, really brilliant example, actually. Netflix you've worked with, where it's kind of threaded that culture through the piece that you've done. You've done some work with Welcome recently that has also captured, quite a different culture from Channel 4, but made it really fundamental. And the care homes, similarly, that you've worked with, where you're picking up what it is that drives people to want to belong to that place. Can you talk through maybe one of those examples and how you achieve that, how you connect with the culture?
Yeah, you mentioned Welcome as an example client in terms of this kind of campaign, and I think they're a great example because they're a really interesting organisation. For anybody who doesn't know Welcome, they are a global health and science charity based in the UK. They have a large pot of money which came from the Welcome pharmaceutical company, which they now invest to fund research projects that are intended to solve the urgent health challenges that face everyone around the world. So this is things like climate change, antimicrobial resistance, antibiotic resistance, and particularly mental health as well. Those are their three key focus areas. And we started working with them in 2019 on a campaign to build engagement with their new code of conduct. And this was, we should say, this is something they hadn't had before. So you could imagine in any organization, a code of conduct could be a set of policies. It could be things like the expenses policy, the gifts and hospitality policy, conflicts of interest, fairness in recruitment, those types of things that any company, any organization could have. They'd never really had one before. And so building engagement with that was tough. They're an organization that relies very much on individual perspectives and individual points of view. They certainly hated, and I think still hate the word corporate, and would want to distance themselves from anything like that. And so saying to people, hey, we're bringing in a code of conduct. It's a set of policies that we need you to read, and then we need you to just engage with them, like do the things that the policies say. That's a tough sell. And going back to your earlier point, there probably isn't much in it for me as an individual. There's a lot in it for the organisation. Getting everyone to work in these ways is necessary if we're going to stay in business and keep doing what we do. But as an individual, it's very easy to feel like you don't care. So how do you do that? Well, what we did really was started with the people. We started with the humans. And so they'd written the code. They'd written the code of conduct. We began with a whole series of video interviews with people from across Welcome. We spoke to lots of people from across the organisations. This was everybody from the director, who was Jeremy Farrar at that point, through to the graduate trainees and all sorts of people in between from different parts of Welcome. And we talked to them about it. And we talked to them about the policies. We talked to them about conduct and ethics at Welcome and what that means and how it fits with the culture. And that shaped our thinking. I think it sort of shaped their thinking a bit as well, in that the interviews were a visible thing that they were doing. So they were, you might say the campaign hadn't launched by that point, but actually they were part of the campaign. We were beginning a dialogue about conduct and ethics at Welcome and what that means. People were aware that it was happening, I think. And so that really shaped the thinking there. And we were constantly reevaluating ideas in the light of what people said. And what came out of this was a sense that people do care about this, that people care about Welcome. They care about doing what Welcome does, and they care about being part of that. There's a reason why they chose to go and work there. I think people tend to choose to go and work there because they are motivated to work at Welcome. They want to work in that organisation, and they want to be supporting this work that is supporting urgent health challenges around the world. And that they could make the connections. They were the ones who made the connections between having these policies and achieving the outcomes that they want, to do the things that made them come to work. And because we were filming these, because we were doing these interviews on video, it meant that we had content. So we were able to build a campaign out of the things that people said. And they said to us, this is more than just a collection of policies. This is a really useful toolkit that helps you do your job better, that helps us all do what we do better, that helps us support each other. And that fundamentally the number one action, this gets us back to behavior change and the moments that matter. The number one action, the moment that matters, is when you are about to do something at work, literally whatever it is, just pausing for a moment and thinking about what you're about to do and checking, do I feel like this is okay? This is something that I'm comfortable doing, or do I need to get some guidance? Perhaps it's that there's something that is not right here and I need to take action. I need to act to stop this, or I need to report this. I need to speak to my manager. I need to contact the Speak Up anonymous reporting line. But the specific moment is the moment when you pause and think before you act and just check your behavior before you go ahead. And we were able to talk about that. And I think it came back to the idea that what we do at Welcome is really important. But it's more than that. It's not just about what we do. It's about how we do what we do and the ways in which we work, and that we really care about that. And so that sense of belonging, really, this is about saying these policies, they're not a sort of external thing that's being imposed on me by my employer. This is a collective understanding. It's a shared understanding of what's important in the ways that we work, and broadly speaking, we all agree that this is right, that we want to work in these ways, and we want to know that we can rely on our colleagues to work in these ways too.
I think one of the things that really stood out for me about that project as well is the line, trust your judgment, which was the kind of strapline, if you like, for the whole campaign, which absolutely speaks to that culture that you're talking about, where people wanted to feel like, they're the experts, they're, often very highly educated. They're people that have maybe come from academia, and they don't want to feel patronised by somebody saying you need to do X, Y, and Z in order to work here. It's more exactly as you're talking about, that sort of shared ownership, but that trust word, and we trust you, is implied through it. I feel trusted, I understand, but I also need to step up and take responsibility for this. Nobody's going to do it for me. I am part of the collective that makes this work. And that for me really stood out.
Yes.
of the project.
And by doing that, we are protecting something special.
Yes.
That we all believe that what we have here is something that is important and that should be protected and preserved and should be allowed to continue to flourish. Yeah. And so by doing those things together, that's what keeps Welcome operating. That's what makes sure that this continues to be a great place to work and to do the things that matter to me and to all of us.
We should give a big shout out to Fraser Simpson, who led on that project. He's the head of ethics and compliance, global ethics and compliance. Sorry, Fraser, if I'm getting your title wrong.
He is Associate General Counsel, Ethics, Governance and Compliance, which is...
You see, that's why I can't remember his job title, but Fraser's an absolute joy to work with and completely gets and buys in and embodies this idea of speak to the human. How he kind of plans the work that he's doing, how to make change happen at Welcome is really forward thinking, and he's connected with other networks beyond Welcome as well. So big shout out to Fraser.
And Fraser, and the thing that is brilliant about Fraser is he totally gets the fact that you can't just tell somebody something and expect them to do it. So his role, he's a lawyer, and so his role encompasses lots of things like writing policies, but he totally gets the fact that you can't write a policy and post it on an intranet and then say, well, we've told you that now, so therefore we can rely on you to do it.
Absolutely.
He gets that people don't behave in those ways.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting strand of thought that we had at last year's Speak to the Human event in Cambridge from Christian Hunt, who works on, who has a podcast called Human Risk, Hello, Christian. He talks a lot about this kind of, you might need people to follow particular rules, but you can't just tell them to do it. You have to understand what is underneath the sort of human behaviour and how to connect with that. James, I'm conscious that we've been talking. It's so easy to carry on this conversation because it's brilliant, and I love talking to you about this stuff. It's so interesting, but we need to wrap up, I think. I guess I've got one last question that I'm going to spring on you, which is about you as a human, speaking to you as a human. So it'd be good to just ask what you're enjoying most about your own work, what you're looking forward to, what really motivates you to do what you do.
That brings me back to the idea of curiosity, which is something I don't know if you can be interested in curiosity. I guess maybe I'm curious about my own curiosity. I think I've arrived at a point in my life where I feel like I have the ability to go and be curious about organizations and people in those organizations, and to use that curiosity to help them bring about change. So for a long time, I think I could say I was curious about the world in those ways, but perhaps hadn't figured out how to make it into something that was useful to other people. And now, through the work that I do at Actian, through the brilliant team of people that I work with, and the clients that we work with, and all the things that I've learned through doing those things, I've got the confidence to go into an organization and be interested in things without necessarily understanding at the beginning where that interest and curiosity is going to take me, but with a belief that we could do something that will be beneficial, and that whatever those boardroom targets are, whatever the meaningful change that the organization wants to bring about, that I can bring something useful that is going to help them think about that, perhaps in a different way to what they were expecting to, and perhaps also bringing something that they may not have been expecting as a solution. So helping them understand that they have choices. They don't necessarily have to do what they've always done before, that there may be something else they could that they could try, and that we believe will make more of a difference because it will perhaps target engagement more effectively. It will build motivation, perhaps create new opportunities, perhaps in terms of capability, it will help people connect with subject matter in ways that they never have before. I hate things that are boring. And so I always try and bring a fresh way of looking at a challenge, and to try and come up with a way of doing things that perhaps people haven't done them before. We don't always end up with whatever the first idea was. Often there's lots of iteration, and you try different things and see which ones work before you actually commit. But just bringing the approach that says, let's look at all the things you've done before. Let's look at the things that have worked. Let's think how we can build on that. How can I help? And starting the engagement without knowing what the answer is going to be, I think, is fundamental for me. Whatever I'm going to do with a client, I don't necessarily go in with a solution. I really enjoy that. And I enjoy working with people where they're prepared to have the faith, I suppose, that working with an organization like Actian is going to give them something better and more impactful than they would have had if they'd done what they've done before.
Yeah, be willing to be a little bit brave. Oh, what a fabulous answer. Thank you. I threw that question at you with no warning, and I love that you've answered that centered on curiosity, because that is such a human trait. You know, it's what drives us as humanity to have evolved and to kind of pursue all sorts of interesting, amazing adventures in our own lives and collectively. So thank you. What a brilliant answer to end on. And thanks. This has been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it. I hope other people have too. And hopefully this is a great way for us to kick off a lot more interesting conversations on Speak to the Human. So thank you, James.
Thank you, Sarah.
And bye for now.